Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We will be discussing a beginner's guide to creating accessible documents. This webinar is brought to you by Assistive Technology in New Hampshire, or atnnh.org. Just a quick introduction about assistive technology in New Hampshire. ATNH is New Hampshire's statewide assistive technology program. It has two major activity areas, the first being training, education, and outreach. AT trainings, classes, and workshops, and AT policy. The second part is assistive technology services, which includes equipment demonstrations, loans, refurbishing, and reuse. Additional information is located on this slide. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the AT&NH staff at 603-862-4320, or you can visit them at their website, atnnh.org. So for a quick introduction, my name's Art Frick. I work for the Institute on Disability. That's me. This is also the most serious picture I have ever taken. As I said, I work at the University of New Hampshire's Institute on Disability, and I am a web designer and developer. I've been working at the IOD since about August in 2012, and I've been working in the online space since about 2006. Part of what I do at the IOD, just a few different things, is I fix problems that arise in, on our 19 or so organizational websites. I work across all of these websites to make sure that things are more accessible every day. I help a lot of our grant writers with specific technical specifications, and when I'm not doing any of that, I build new sites with Drupal. So what are we covering today? Today we're going to talk about a quick overview of web accessibility. We're going to talk about accessibility in Microsoft Word. We're going to discuss some general accessibility stuff in Adobe Acrobat, and then we're going to go over some additional resources. Just so that everyone's aware, some formatting and housekeeping stuff. You can download this presentation at https://unh.box.com/v/access docs. If you need this webinar in alternative formats, please email us at contact.iod@unh.edu. We'll be glad to help you out with whatever alternative formats you guys are looking for. We are recording this webinar, and we will send all the registered participants a link to the video that will be hosted on our YouTube channel. It's not looking like we're going to have time for questions. However, we do have a Twitter account, and if you want, you can tweet to the UNH-IOD and use the accessible docs hashtag for questions, and I will get back to those within the next day or two. Also, you can email us, again, that's at contact.iod@unh.edu if you have any additional questions at all. So one thing that we need to discuss is that we're operating on over a few technical assumptions. So as there are 300 different versions of Microsoft Word and another 300 different versions of Adobe Acrobat, it's important that we all be on the same page. So that being said, we are operating on a PC, not a Mac. If you are using a Mac, you might find that things are in different places. We're going to be using Microsoft Word 2016. That's part of Office 365 or whatever package that is the most recent and latest, greatest version. I've found that generally within the last couple of releases, most of the accessibility stuff that we're going to talk about is roughly the same. It might be under slightly different menus or worded slightly differently, but generally in the prior recent versions, most of this stuff is pretty transferable. Again, if you need specific things on your version of Microsoft Word, I would advise a quick Google search. Additionally, we're going to be looking at screen grabs and captures from Adobe Professional DC, Acrobat Pro DC. That is the most latest version of that, and it's also important that if you are looking at this through different non-DC versions, so if you're looking at Acrobat Pro, from a couple of years ago, that you are in fact looking at Acrobat Professional, as not all of the features are going to be available in all versions. So for instance, and we'll talk about this later on, but accessibility stuff is generally only able to be done within the professional version of Adobe Acrobat and so on. So yeah, and also specifically in dealing with Adobe Acrobat, I've noticed that in the jump from the previous to the professional DC version, a lot of the accessibility information is dramatically different, such as like things are located under different menus and things like that. So it's important that you pay attention to what version of Acrobat you're currently on. And if it's not professional DC, that you might be in your best interest to do a Google search and see where you can figure out where these things are located elsewhere. So one thing that I would like to talk about is that online and digital document accessibility helps provide equal access to people with diverse abilities. So one thing that I like to think about when talking about web and digital and document accessibility is that even though I might have a barrier in the physical world, that disability can be dramatically reduced, if not removed, digitally. So by utilizing accessible best practices, we're in fact able to reduce the impact that disability has on individuals' lives. Additionally, the UN Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities recognizes that access to information and communications technology, including the web, as a basic human right. So that's a lot of the fuel and a lot of my interest for doing this kind of work and remediation. Just beginning in our quick overview, we're going to be talking a lot about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are a referenceable, testable, technical standard of publishing information on the internet. In just a quick summary, it's 12 guidelines organized into 4 principles: perceivable, which is how we view things; operable, which is how we interact with things; understandable, which is how we interpret that data; and robust, which is basically future-proofing it. Again, if you want to check out the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in further detail, I would earnestly advise you to do that, as most of this stuff all forms the basis of our remediation efforts concerning document accessibility as well as online accessibility. And oftentimes we're fixing the same issues that one would have on a website. So as I just said, we're looking for the same things. And they're closely related. We have the same issues of concern. Headings need to be properly noted. Images need to be properly tagged. Tables need to be marked up. Hyperlinks need to make sense out of context. Lists, the correct mechanisms need to be used. And if you're familiar at all with web accessibility, in a very general sense, this is all the same kind of stuff that we're looking for. So one thing that I've come to realize over the course of doing this kind of stuff is that it helps when I think of a document that I'm looking at as a web page. Generally, accessible documents don't mean boring documents. So what we're able to do is to control how things look and separate how things look from the accessibility components of it and from how a user using a screen reader would interact with it. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's take a look here. Okay, so headings. One of the biggest things that we can do in order to help somebody navigate through a document non-visually is have headings. And headings should be selected based on their hierarchy in the document. Heading 1 might be a title, whereas heading 2 might be a chapter. Things of equal importance should have the same value. So it's important to think, I like to think about headings as sort of an outline. So our first heading we would want to be a title, whereas heading 2 would be chapters, and heading 3 could be subheadings in chapters, and that so on and so forth. It's also important that we don't skip headings. So we don't want to have a heading 1 and then immediately jump to a heading 3 bypassing heading 2, as that doesn't make sense in the logical hierarchy of the document. So that's great, Art, but how do we actually do that? So in Microsoft Word, headings can be applied directly from the main Home tab. I'm sure everybody has seen this menu, where you can easily flick back and forth from different kinds of styles. But actually these have a point, and heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3 are specifically meant for creating document structure. If you right-click and hit modify, you can change the style of the settings. So if this is a small picture of the modify and the ensuing screen, you can access the format button, and that'll give you various access to font attributes. So you can modify the styles of all of these things. So that's way, we don't have to limit ourselves to what Microsoft Office thinks that we should have. We can go in and figure out what we want each heading to look like and what we want each thing to be in the color schemes, and make sure our colors are accessible. So basically we're not locked into using whatever pre-described version that Microsoft Office has. We can customize everything. So the next big thing that we should probably discuss is alt text. Alt text are what provides sufficient information so that users who are unable to see images, graphs, tables, complex images are still able to understand what those images convey. Just a couple of rules for thumb. It's helpful to limit to 120 characters, alt text for simple images. We don't want to force a screen reader user to listen to 3 paragraphs describing a red ball if that's unnecessary. Alt text for graphs, tables, and complex images should give a brief summary of the information. So if we're inserting a complex graph into a table, we should make sure that our alt text is describing the ultimate summary of what looking at that table would give the end user. And lastly, alt text isn't needed for purely decorative images. So a quick way to just take a peek, let's see how we do this in Microsoft Word. So we're going to insert our image. There are a couple of different ways to do that. You can pick your favorite way. And then once we click on the image and we have that inserted into our Word document, we can right-click and then scroll down to the bottom and hit Format Picture from the drop-down. The Format Picture sidebar should open, and then we're going to go ahead and click on the Layout and Properties button. If you'll see, this is the format picture that would be opened in the sidebar in Microsoft Office 2016, the current version. The third icon over is specifically the Layout and Properties button, and that's going to be a recurring theme here as we address multiple things. Generally, regardless of what specific item you're right-clicking and formatting, you're almost always going to have the ability to add alt text. So that's graphs, pictures, captions, all that stuff is done here. And that third item over gives you always gives you access to this title and description. It's important that we realize that we're filling in the description field and not the title field. There's lots of testing that's been done in various screen readers and assistive technology where the title tag is not necessarily always read. The description field, however, is. So it's important that as we're going through all of these things and tagging, that we're putting our alt text in the correct place. So charts. Again, we're going to insert this the same way that we would an image or any other media. Right-click on the chart area and select the Format Chart Area from the option. So same thing, last item, Format Chart Area. And then the sidebar should open. Again, this is going to work exactly the same as it would for an image. And again, we're going to see third over from the side our formatting option there for the alt text button with the Layout and Properties. And again, as always, we're going to hit the Layout and Properties button there. And then again, we want to make sure that whatever summary that we're giving for this chart is in the description field and not the title. Again, just to reiterate, when providing text alternatives for charts, we want to summarize the data being graphically displayed. Tables also have alt text. Similarly to charts, we want to highlight the trends in the data, or moreover, what the viewer would gain from looking at the table. Oftentimes, it's very easy to look at a table and see that maybe as the numbers flow from left to right, that the data, the amounts increase, or there's a visible trend that could be seen. That kind of information is stuff that we want to include in the alt text for the table such that it's read and displayed to a non-visual user. Again, table properties are a little bit different. You right-click on your table, scroll down to table properties, and then there's just merely a tab that says alt text. Again, description, your alt tag goes in the description, not in the title. So another consideration that we need to have with tables is the column headers. So screen readers can identify column headings as users move through a table if they're specified in Microsoft Word. This is critical to ensure that users with visual impairments can understand the table content. Again, for those of you that know about accessibility remediation in HTML, this is no different than using column headers in HTML. The only difference is that in this case we don't have access to the pure HTML. We're going to just denote the header row from the table menu, the table style options section of the table menu. So if you're in Microsoft Word and you're playing around with your tables, this is now going to be the top bar that you're going to see, and we want to make sure that header row is selected. And again, that'll make sure that your screen reader is reading the table in a logical way to the end user. So this is becoming the one of the more interesting parts of my life in the online accessibility space, is hyperlinks, and how many bad hyperlinks I see on any given day. So what we're looking at here, where we're on the page visible now, is the output of a screen reader. Now, screen readers and various types of assistive technology give end users the opportunity to navigate from link to link to link, or from heading to heading to heading. So what's important to note is that our link text needs to make sense out of context. If I was using JAWS or NVDA or anything, I would literally be read accessible table of contents, what to fix, links on a web page, what to fix, Jim Thatcher quality text links, web aim accessible links and hypertext, click here, 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 read more, read more. So it's easy to see as the quality of our link text degrades, so does the end user experience if I'm getting this information read to me by assistive technology. So we want to make sure that we're writing links that make sense out of context. We also visually, in the structure of our documents, want to maintain the standard that link text are underlined and have a color value that's different than the main text. Just as an aside, if you're using an image as a link, make sure that your destination is included in the alt tag of the image. That again helps individuals that are using screen readers know where they're going. So I think that it's best just to drive this point home if we look at some examples. So some unclear link text examples would be click here for instructions on how to use, again with click here being the hyperlink. Learn more about color and accessibility here and here being the hyperlink. Story 1, read more. Story 2, read more. Again, read more doesn't make sense out of context. Accessibility 101, register. Accessibility 102, register. Again, register, what am I registering for? So how can we translate this into some usable link context? Maybe instructions for the new IOD website are available online instead of click here. Maybe we can learn more about color and accessibility in terms of contrast and color coding so that the link makes sense in terms of what you're looking at. Story 1 and Story 2, there's no need to specify read more as long as we're clicking right through to the story. And again, we can register for Accessibility 101 and Accessibility 102. So again, these links would make sense out of context and thus provide an improved end user experience for the viewer. Lists, quickly. List items, you want to use the native Word list formatting functions so that the list must be formatted in Word through a numbered or bulleted list so that they're grouped together for users with assistive technology. Do not manually type numbers or dashes before items. So what this is doing is basically underneath the pretty Microsoft Word display is actually inserting the OL or UL HTML tags into the document that ultimately the screen reader is going to pick up. So, and that's why it's important that we use these things so that they're read in a logical fashion. Again, if you're in just your home, you can insert lists by merely navigating over to the paragraph section, and then you have your ordered and unordered list selections. So, yep. Another thing that I wanted to touch on is metadata. Now, all documents have metadata, and that metadata can be transferred from Microsoft Word over to Adobe Acrobat if that's your end destination. When a document is first opened, screen readers will convey the title rather than the file name of the document when there's a document title set in the document properties. So this is incredibly handy when sometimes document titles make infinitely more sense than the physical file name. Consider you can in this metadata you can also add other things such as the author, the keywords, and the organization, and those can all help inform the user as to what they're looking at. It's also important that we want to match the text and the title attribute to the full title used in the main body of the document, and that's just the best practice for accessibility. So let's look at some examples. So to access the document metadata, we're going to click File in the main ribbon, and that's presented here. So File, our first thing, and then we're going to click on Properties and Advanced Properties, which this will be right to just to the right of the main first navigational element. So Properties, Advanced Properties, and then that's going to bring us up the accessibility presentation or whatever document that you're looking at. In this sample, we're just looking at sample metadata from a test document that I was working on. So again, you can see that we can see the title, the subject, the author, the company. You can add categories and keywords. And all of this stuff can help to inform the end user. Click OK, and that metadata will be applied. Lastly, in Microsoft Word, it's important that we talk about the accessibility checker. Word 2016 definitely comes with an accessibility checker. It's not fantastic, but it can absolutely help identify some overlooked items. You can access it by clicking the file from the main ribbon and then check accessibility submenu under the Check for Issues button. And that's what we're seeing here. So it's the second item down. And then if we click Check for Issues, the drop down, and then the second item, Check for Accessibility, is where we're going to. It'll alert you to various issues that it finds, and it can also offer suggestions on how to remediate those errors. This slide, we're going to take a look at our results. So the accessibility checker results will appear on the right side of the screen. And this is some sample output from the accessibility checker. So you can see in this sample there was missing alt text on a picture, and then we skipped a heading level. So what's also nice is it tells you why to fix something, and then it tells you sort of how to fix something. By clicking on the errors, it will also navigate to the item in question. So in this case, if I were to click on headings on the main area of the document, it would navigate to that heading in question. Again, like I said, the additional information section is good for tips and remediation. Again, these aren't hard and fast, and I don't think that this is meant in any way to replace a manual, check and making sure that this won't do things like pick up on color contrast or some of the more subtle elements of web accessibility, of document accessibility and web accessibility. So I think let's shift our focus now and let's talk about Adobe Acrobat. So Acrobat is awesome because it gives us a way to preserve the visual nature of our documents without relying on other people to make sure that they have the right font that we're using, or make sure that our links, our images are embedded correctly. Basically, what Acrobat does is it gives us a way that all of this stuff can be reliably displayed, and that's why we use it today. Unfortunately, PDFs generally aren't as accessible as native Word, HTML, or plain text documents. And Another big thing is that you must have the professional version of Adobe Acrobat. The standard and reader versions don't have access to the accessibility panel, and therefore it makes remediation next to impossible to do without the Pro version. If you're in an organization that does not have access to the Acrobat professional version, a resource that I found is Common Look PDF Global Access. Again, I'm unsure of the price of this, but it does a great job of crawling through a PDF and figuring out what those errors are, as well as helping you to fix them. One thing that is worth mentioning when we're talking about Adobe Acrobat is your source documents. It's imperative that your source documents being used to generate your PDFs be made accessibly, so that we're not going to gain accessibility features by going from Word to Acrobat. What we can hope for in a best possible situation is that the due diligence that we did in Microsoft Word by applying appropriate heading styles and alt tagging our images is going to be transferred into Acrobat. If your source documents aren't made accessibly, it's incredibly difficult to do so even in Acrobat Pro. There's just not a reliable, easy way of mitigating any accessibility issues. So it's important that we take a look at how can we get our documents out of Microsoft Office and into PDF with as many accessibility features as possible. In Microsoft Word, provided you have Adobe Acrobat Professional installed, chances are you're going to have this Acrobat tab. It's going to appear after View on your main Microsoft Word menu. And I believe this is systemic across the Microsoft Office suite, so that you'll always be able to access exporting to Acrobat. We're going to click on the Acrobat tab and see our submenu. And then we're going to go to the Preferences option, which is the second option listed over here in the main menu for Acrobat. So we want to make sure that Word is generating the most accessibly minded PDF possible. So we're going to enable accessibility with reflow with tagged PDF. So these are the preferences options, and under settings, application settings, we're going to enable accessibility with reflow with tagged PDF. We can then create PDF, which if you hit OK and apply and get out of that menu and we go back, we're going to create our PDF. And that will give you hopefully as many accessibility features as you baked into your Microsoft Office document over into your Acrobat file. So one major shift that I found, and it actually took me a while of finding it in Acrobat Professional DC, is they've managed to do a little bit of reconfiguring and how you add the accessibility tools to your interface. So again, things have been moved around considerably, so we get to find them. So now we want to add the accessibility tools to the Adobe Acrobat interface. And we do that by clicking Tools. So in your main submenu when your document is open, you're going to see a file, we're going to see Home, and then we're going to see Tools. So by clicking Tools, it's going to give us a bunch of options for different kinds of toolkits that we can have. And we're going to navigate to Accessibility and click Open. Once that's done, you're gonna see the document, and you're going to see the accessibility toolbar on the right side of the screen. So one thing that I like to start out with is seeing what issues we have in our PDF the moment that we open it. So once we have our accessibility tools open, we can navigate to that accessibility panel and select Full Check to perform a cursory evaluation of potential issues. So again, this is our picture of the accessibility tab open, and we're going to navigate down to the fourth option, which is Full Check. We have some options. We want to make sure that all of our options are enabled. So we want to make sure that the permission flag is set, the document is not an image only. We want to make sure the document's properly tagged. We want to make sure that we're following a logical reading order, that our language is specified, that our document title is showing. Again, that's going back to metadata. And when we hit start checking, we want to make sure that, again, to reiterate, we want to make sure that all of our boxes are checked before we start checking. The analyzer, after a full check is run, will pop up onto the left, showing the parts of the file that need to be remediated. You'll even be notified of items that require manual check. So, again, in our sample document, you'll see that there were 3 issues. That the title failed, and there was an alt text issue, and there was a table issue. But you'll also see that we need to check out the logical reading order, and we need to do a manual check to make sure that our color contrast needs are being met. So adding alt text in Adobe Acrobat is somewhat different than it would be in Microsoft Office. In Adobe Acrobat, it treats things a little bit more intuitively in that you can navigate from piece to piece, setting alt text fairly quickly, as long as you have a pretty clear idea of what your alt text should be. So what we're looking at here is in my sample document, by going to our accessibility tab, navigating down to the 6th, 7th item, set alternate text. Acrobat will automatically scan the document for all images and anything that should have an alt tag, and then it'll present you with this nice set alternate text dialog box where you can quickly page back and forth through your image elements. You can also indicate if things are decorative or not, so that we know they're not going to be read. And really, this is a pretty quick and painless way of adding alt text fairly rapidly to a document. Another thing that's super important is the reading order. So oftentimes when we're looking at PDFs, they might be generated from Adobe Illustrator, or they might be generated from InDesign, and things that might confuse what a logical reading order should be. So to ensure that PDF contents are read in the correct order, proper headings and reading order, you got to manually set these things. Documents with images, columns, text boxes, tables, etc. will typically require more effort to be made fully accessible. So the more complex your document is, the more attention you're going to need to pay to the reading order of all of those various elements. You should also note that if your heading structure was present in the source document, the PDF should have maintained the structure. Even so, it's important that you never take that for granted, and you always want to make sure that your reading order is following the logical and intended path that you've laid out for it. So let's take a look at an example. So if we select reading order from the accessibility sidebar, which is the last tab, the last menu item in our accessibility menu, you're going to see an overlay that'll appear over your main document. And what it is it's all of the elements, all of the text, all of the images, all of the physical elements that are existing on the document with an accompanied number. And that number is what represents the physical reading order of the document, such that if you're navigating this with a screen reader, it's going to read 1 through ... in the order that you've specified in this document. So how do you assign it? So if your document doesn't have assigned reading orders, or you wish to add or edit, you can click the Draw Rectangle button, and and you can physically draw a rectangle around the content that you'd like to be ordered. So in this sample content, we're going to just denote that this is a merely decorative image. And so if I drew a rectangle around, you'd see just a light blue box that would appear around what's going on underneath it, and then you could assign a reading order to that. This other graphic that we're seeing here is the actual Draw Rectangle button. So you can click that, and then your cursor is going to change, and you can increase areas of existing rectangles. You can also draw completely new rectangles if something got lost in the translation. You can also assign various attributes to the selection, such as heading levels, tables, cells, and background images. So as you draw your rectangle, the touch-up reading order options will enable and disable as needed. One last thing that I definitely like to take a look at is the show order panel. So if you would like to check and edit the reading order, make sure that your screen readers are moving logically through the document, open up the show order panel. And so from our touch-up reading order option, we can hit the show order panel, and then this will show you the reading order of the PDF. And then as we're looking at this, if you have things that you want to be read sooner, you can merely drag them earlier in the document. If you have things that are less important, you can drag those to the bottom of the document so they're read last. And I think that it's important to recognize that this was a lot of information. And what I've often came up with is that really only I can make my documents more accessible. At our organization, there's no one person that's tasked with going through all of the PDFs that we generate on any given day and making sure that all of those things are accessible. It's up to every one of us to make sure that the things that we're putting out in the world are as accessible as possible. It's also important that we don't take anything for granted in this accessibility remediation that we're undertaking. Oftentimes, it's very easy to get into the habit of, well, this source document was built accessibly, so my PDF is going to be totally accessible. And that's often not the case. Things happen. While this is all fairly reliable technology, it's not perfect technology. And I think that's the, I haven't encountered a tool that doesn't negate the need for some granular analysis on a document by document basis. Another thing that we can think about is we can design our documents for accessibility. We can lay our documents out in a logical and intuitive fashion that would make sense just by visually looking at it. And by doing that, we're going to help ourselves in the terms of making these documents more accessible. We're going to give ourselves a lot easier of a time in doing that. And we always want to check our documents in PDFs. Again, that goes back to taking nothing for granted. If something can break, chances are it's going to. And that's the reality of accessibility and remediation, I think, is that it's a continued effort that we need to undertake. And lastly, we want to remove the barriers to your information. And that's the point of this, right? So it's up to all of us to, as we're putting content out in the world, to make sure that it's accessible to as broad of an audience as possible. And we can do that by making our documents accessible through these remediation efforts. So that being said, the internet is awash with tons and tons and tons of resources on how to do this. I've combed through, and these are just sort of my greatest hits of what I've found. Web access at MSU. This website contains huge amounts of data around document accessibility. Again, I will send out the link for you guys to download this presentation, so you can click through to the. You can use these hyperlinks. Accessibility at Penn State. Great general web accessibility info, and definitely was one of my, when I first got into web and document accessibility, the Penn State accessibility site definitely provided a lot of my cursory knowledge because of how simple it is to understand and how intuitively, and logically laid out the entire website is. So accessibility at Penn State is a great resource. WebAIM out of the University of Utah is a great resource also. They do a great job of taking a lot of the more archaic WCAG 2.0 specifications and boiling them down to actionable and easily digestible nuggets of little information that you can then go and turn into other things. Lynda.com also has a couple of great trainings on web and document accessibility. Again, they're not free, but some organizations have subscriptions to Lynda. Great things there. And lastly, if you want just to, if you're really concerned about your PDFs, I found this tool, which is called the PAC checker, and it's a fantastic and free accessibility checker for PDFs. And what it'll do is you import your PDF, and it will crawl through your PDF and identify all sorts of accessibility issues and things that you can then go back and remediate. But really great resources. Lastly, as we're wrapping up here, I would love for you guys to help us. And you can do that by taking a quick survey at this hyperlink, or for those of you who are into it, you can go to http://goo.gl/xtdxw4. Again, that is a Google short link, and those are case sensitive. So anyway, this is a survey about how you're going to take this information and utilize it moving forward. And as part of our grant requirements and reporting stuff, it would be super beneficial to have as much information from you guys as possible so that we can continue to offer trainings like this moving forward. Lastly, I would like to say thank you for everybody attending. It's always a great privilege to be able to talk about accessibility and document accessibility and web accessibility to people that want to listen. Again, please email us at contact.iod@unh.edu with any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have. My name is Art Frick. This is my contact information. I work for the Institute on Disability, which is available. Their contact information is here. And lastly, this webinar was brought to you by AT&NH, and their contact information is available here. Moving forward, we will provide a link to this slide deck, as well as a link to our YouTube video to all of the registered participants. So don't worry if you weren't able to frantically document everything that was said. We will be sending this stuff out again to registered participants, and hopefully we can see what we can do about getting this stuff posted up on that data, the links to that data available on Twitter as well. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.